Now, live from the new San Pasqual Wild Animal Park, a special events presentation of Channel 10, Wilderness of the Future. Now, here is your host, Jack White.
The Wilderness of the Future. Welcome to the San Diego Wild Animal Park, the second campus of the San Diego Zoo. This is more than just an annex to the Balboa Park facility. It is an experiment in preserving endangered species for all mankind in the future. In the next 60 minutes, we're going to take you on a monorail train ride around this park, and you're going to see some of the wild animals that live here. We're going to find out the hows and the whys of this park. About 10 minutes ago, out in front of the bird aviary just behind me, was the dedication ceremonies, and this is Dedication Day. That's why we're here, to give you a preview of the park and to take part in those ceremonies. Here's how that dedication ceremony looked just a few minutes ago. The dedication ceremonies here at the Wild Animal Park are like just about everything else here, very, very different. Instead of the normal ribbon-cutting ceremony, we're going to have an elephant go through a giant bullseye, which is placed right in front of the rondavel, or the entrance to the Wild Animal Park. There are about 500 people gathered out here for the dedication ceremonies, and in just a moment we're going to be hearing from the president of the San Diego Zoological Society, Mr. Anderson Borthwick.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the directors and members of the Zoological Society of San Diego, we would like to declare this park open for the benefit of all children and young at heart. Pat, will you bring the elephant up here for the charge, please?
So Pat and Ted Derby are going to take Nina, an Asian elephant, right through the bullseye here, and there she goes. And the park is now officially open. And as we say, it's a little bit different than any other type of opening. Nina, an Asian elephant, a former circus elephant. Speaking now to those gathered here is Ian Player from South Africa.
And saw this park, I said to myself that this is one place in the world where I would like to see them established. And as I said to your president, Mr. Borthwick, last night, and to your director, Mr. Dr. Schrader, that there are few people in the world that I have done better business with. I suggested that you took 20 rhino. They agreed. We shook hands, and that was worth $100,000, and never a piece of paper passed between us. I believe that is faith, and I believe that wildlife brings it about. Thank you very much.
The guest of honor here today at the dedication of the Wild Animal Park, Mr. Ian Player. It was on January of 1971 that the San Diego Zoo received the following telegram. 22 white rhinos departed the shores of South Africa at 600 hours this morning. The largest consignment of rhino ever to leave the shores of South Africa. We are happy they are going to the world-renowned San Diego Zoo, and we willingly entrust them to your care. Signed, Ian Player. Mr. Player has literally single-handedly saved the white rhino population in South Africa through his efforts of conservation. Mr. Player even goes further. He is the game warden of a preserve that takes in 10,500 square miles. At the head table gathered a number of distinguished people today, many of them trustees for the San Diego Zoo, businessmen from San Diego, and those representing government figures. Running down that list, we have at the end Mr. Tom Scripps. He is a trustee for the zoo. George Lithicum, he is the mayor pro tem of Escondido, bordering the Wild Animal Park. Gene Trepke, he is a trustee for the zoo. Then there's General Victor Krulak, also a trustee. Of course, Ian Player, the chief conservator of Zululand, South Africa, who was the principal speaker, and you just heard moments ago. Sheldon Campbell, a trustee for the zoo. Then we have Bill Burrid, who is acting today as Master of Ceremonies. Speaking at the podium is San Diego Mayor Pete Wilson, of course. Anderson Borthwick, whom you saw earlier, is president of the San Diego Zoological Society. There's Norman Livermore, Jr. He is representing Governor Reagan. He is the Secretary of State Resources. Bob Smith, trustee for the San Diego Zoo. Harry Scheidel, chairman of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors. Ivor DeKirby, a trustee for the San Diego Zoo. Ed Gillenwater, he is also representing Governor Reagan from the state of California. He is director of the Department of Commerce for the state. Dr. Minton Fetter, he is a trustee for the San Diego Zoo. Bob Sullivan, also a trustee for the zoo, and Dallas Clark, a trustee. And then seated at the end is Dr. Charles Schroeder, the director of the San Diego Zoo. Now, immediately in front of the speaker's stand, which is really a bridge that leads over to the Mombasa Cooker just across from the little island that I am seated on. Just prior to all of these speeches, Joan Embry brought Carol Elephant up, and she gave her a bath. That is an elephant wash pool out there. That's a daily attraction here at the Wild Animal Park. Elephant baths. Now, we recorded this elephant bath on film a week or so ago. There were a group of laborers and construction men around, and they watched, somewhat awestruck, as the bath took place. And here's how it looked. Joan Embry is now the zoo's Goodwill Ambassador. She began working with Carol Elephant nearly 3 years ago when she was an attendant at the Children's Zoo in Balboa Park. Carol first made a name for herself as a painter and sold a number of her canvases, but says Joan, taking a bath is by far Carol's favorite pastime. Carol Elephant is only 5 years old and considered still a baby. By the time she's an adult, in 10 more years, she could triple her present weight. Carol is one of the 4 Asian elephants on display here at the park. And this afternoon's bath will be a daily routine and a very appealing attraction at Nairobi Village. Carol is a natural ham, and if Joan runs out of the water, so does Carol. And if she goes back, well, Carol's back in again. The dedication speeches are still going on here at Nairobi Village of the Wild Animal Park. We're going to be back to join more of the opening festivities right after this time out. We are in the Nairobi Village of the Wild Animal Park. As we told you earlier, we're going to take a tour of this entire park a little bit later in our program. We're going to have a first-hand look at the wild animals and their natural habitat. Probably right about now you're asking yourself just exactly where the heck is the San Pasqual Valley? Well, it is about 30 miles northeast of downtown San Diego. It is indeed a wilderness. As a matter of fact, the San Pasqual Valley, until now, was probably best known as the site of a very bloody skirmish in the War of the Acquisition of California by the United States. It is December 1846. U.S. troops, led by General Stephen Kearny and his scout Kit Carson, encountered a contingent of Californios under General Andres Pico. The U.S. troops, tired after a 2-month trek from Santa Fe, New Mexico, were hard-pressed to match the well-rested and freshly provisioned Californios. The U.S. forces had endured several days of drenching rain, and their weapons would not fire. They were no match for the Californios and the long lances which they carried. The battle was brief but bloody. The U.S. troops suffered heavy casualties, but Kearny's battered force was eventually reinforced by sailors and Marines from San Diego, whereupon Pico's forces withdrew. The battle here in the San Pasqual Valley, 126 years ago, is now commemorated by a California State Historical Monument. The marker is bounded on 3 sides by the Wild Animal Park and on the south by Highway 78. And so, what was once a battleground for cavalry forces is now a playground for white rhinos. So, the San Pasqual Valley is steeped in California history. The valley today is also an agricultural center and the site of numerous dairy farms. In its 55-year history, the San Diego Zoo in Balboa Park has had but 3 directors. Dr. Charles Schroeder came to San Diego in 1953 as the 3rd director. And in the years since he has taken control of our zoo, it has emerged as one of the greatest in the world. For more than a decade, Dr. Schroeder has been dreaming about a wild animal park like this one. Dr. Charles Schroeder is a dynamic and a tireless man. Perhaps more than anyone else, the Wild Animal Park is a product of his energies. In the late 1960s, when this park was nothing more than a series of sketches on paper, Dr. Schroeder rolled up his sleeves and took a bundle of surveyor stakes under his arm, and then he began walking the present route of the park's monorail system. Today, it's called the Wagasa Bush Line. Every morning, 6 days a week, before going to his office at the zoo in Balboa Park, Dr. Schroeder comes here and he surveys all the grounds, his alert eyes catching all that crosses his path.
This morning, I made the tour with Bill Kreitzer, who's in charge of the animals in this particular section, and we agreed that this has far exceeded our expectations all the way. You have in your mind's eye certain things, what these exhibits, what this area, the lagoon is going to look like, or Charles Faust's design of the fishing village, and it's just better. It's more spectacular than we could have ever conceived. So the whole park goes far beyond our expectations. We needed a place for overflow for the enormous reproduction we had in the park, in Balboa Park, and we needed overflow. But the reason we needed the overflow, we felt there was real good reason in conserving animals, reproducing them, and having a nucleus, a source of some of the world's great rarities for use by other zoos rather than go out and deplete a wild population. There's no such terrain that I know of anywhere outside East Africa. It's so typically what we speak of as high veld in East Africa, as a matter of fact extending into South Africa, Uganda, and on down through Natal, around the Johannesburg area and into Kruger National Park. And it's inconceivable we should have such beautiful country completely occupied in the city of San Diego. No one can quite comprehend this. Here it is. And you couldn't have better terrain or ideal country. Now, as you look at it, when I speak of ideal, down in these great valleys here, in these canyons, there isn't enough growth to exclude the animal or have a hiding place. You're in the train, and throughout, the animals are close by, so you have wonderful visibility all the way, the whole 5-mile ride. And it's just great. Now, this is unique. First, it's much larger than any of the domestic, privately operated or public zoos, wherever they've grown. But it's obviously not as large as some of the big preserves that involve thousands of square miles. But neither do you have opportunity to see the animals there. You might go there and days on end only see 2 or 3 species each day. And here you can see the wild animals that are common to Asia and Africa.
What would Dr. Schroeder like to see for this park in 10 years?
Well, we've developed about 40% of it now, and we want to go up onto the high area. There's a large and a very beautiful plateau high up in the back, and we will have a second railroad line, a monorail, going up there. When we go up into the new area with larger motors, we'll negotiate a 12% grade and go up the canyons to the high area, the high mesas overlooking the valley, and we'll have a whole group of new exhibits up there. And we look forward to this. Then we also, of course, want to extend our research program, and at the hospital area we will go to the east on the road to Ramona, and we'll have many research activities in that area, which require new structures and many animals, sponsored by the, well, many private and public funding agencies to do research, mostly in animal reproduction and nutrition, behavior.
When Dr. Charles Schroeder talks about this preserve with its rhinos, its elephants, giraffes, and other exotic wildlife, his eyes are filled with excitement, and his voice relays a feeling of accomplishment. And then he'll say, "This belongs to the people of San Diego. It's theirs to share with the world, and they can be proud of it."
This is the wilderness of the future. We'll be back with more in just a moment. It took 3 men to bring Dr. Schroeder's dream to the drawing boards. It took countless others to make them a reality. But the 3 who first took the steps were Charlie Faust, Fred Liebhardt, and Harold Barr. Much of Nairobi Village was designed and planned far from the wilds of Africa. Most of it took place here in this office in La Jolla. It's the architectural firm of Liebhardt, Weston, and Goldman. Fred Liebhardt and Charlie Faust put their minds together to give the park its unique design. Faust is employed full-time by the zoo as a designer, and his credits include the design of the Children's Zoo, the Great Ape Grottos, the Bird of Prey Aviary, and the Kiwi exhibit at the Balboa Park facility. Though Nairobi Village was designed and planned on this side of the world, its inspiration came from far across the sea.
Some of the larger buildings, as you know, there are no really huge buildings in Africa. They're all kind of native, smaller, individual dwelling places. But we have a few structures that are quite representative of things you might find in Africa. Now the entrance, there might be larger buildings in Africa, but that happened to be the largest I saw. That's in Uganda. It's a burial tomb of the Baganda kings, and it was outside of Kampala, Uganda, and it was pretty close to the size that we ended up with, just coincidentally. And it was the largest building I saw in Africa, a native-built building.
When you leave the entry rondavel, the first thing you see is this massive aviary. And to get to the animal worlds beyond, you must walk through it. There's a reason for that.
We felt that it was necessary after the people came into the park to have a large structure that maybe they could walk into like they can in the bird cage and be in intimate, close association with some animals and birds. And this would further divorce the cars in the parking lot and emphasize the feeling that they were going into another world, sort of.
And indeed you do. It's a world of color and motion, of plumage and melody, wing beats and waterfalls. You can find everything here from a Uganda double-toothed barbet to a lilac-breasted roller. All told, 500 birds of 35 species call this free-flight aviary home. you've spent some time with these rare birds and emerged from the other side, you come face to face with Charlie Faust's favorite portion of the park, the Congo River Fishing Village.
Oh, I just think it sets the stage and the mood and does a lot of things that we were really trying to do. It's built with very native materials and probably in a very native way, and parts of it are very authentic to what you might see along the Congo River if you were in Africa.
The other half of the design team is Fred Liebhart, who is responsible for the design of structures like the San Diego Yacht Club, the Islandia Hotel, Anthony's, and a number of buildings at the University of California at San Diego campus. But a jungle village, well, that was something new, and there were some little problems.
Little problems always are big problems when they're there. Probably the one that comes first to mind is the problem of building structures, designing and building structures that look African, seem African, or at least project an African image out of materials that are appropriate to that, and doing so without violating the fire codes and the various safety and building codes that we have. Of course, one of the first conclusions that we came to was that there was no way we were going to reproduce an African village, let alone Nairobi, which is not a village. And so we gave up the idea of attempting to do anything that pretended to be authentic throughout. And so we've tried to create the feeling or the image rather than the actual object. We spent quite a bit of time in the early stages trying to break them of their good work habits, and in the process we may very well have ruined Lueto Construction Company's framing crew for the next job they undertake, because it's going to take them a while to get back to thinking vertical and horizontal.
If you were called up and asked to do another wild animal park, what would you say?
I'd say, let's go. This job has been more fun, more challenging, but more fun than any job that we've been involved in for a long time.
The task of translating the drawings and designs of Faust and Liebhart fell to Harold Barr. Barr is the Director of Construction and Maintenance for the park and the zoo, and familiar with unusual tasks.
Well, I think one of our greatest problems was the procurement of materials. There are so many things used in the construction of this village that can't be bought off the shelf. They have to be found somewhere and bought by someone. And then I think maybe the next greatest problem would be workmen in putting these materials together.
But Barr's problems went further than just building an African village. How do you solve the daily water needs of 1,000 animals?
Well, of course, water has been our prime problem from the time of the inception of the park. We tried drilling wells in the valley and found these were totally unsuitable. We talked about bringing water in from the Metropolitan Water District mains, and they were too far away. We finally arrived in agreement with the city of Escondido to get water from their lines, but it meant that we eventually are going some 18,500 feet with our own pipelines. With this shortage of water, we've made every effort to utilize this water to its fullest. One thing, of course, that we had to do was have our own sewage treatment plant because there is no sewage disposal system anywhere within reach, so we have to provide our own. We use this treated water then, which comes out essentially pure in some of the animal exhibits, in the big pools for the elephants, for instance, and then it is used a third time for irrigation. The water in the main lagoon in the village is in constant recycling, used for irrigation within the village and parking lot areas. There isn't any water that comes into the park that isn't used at least twice, which is a good conservation thing and also is a necessity for us.
Those, of course, are but three of the men who breathed life into this park. I've had a bit of a show all of my own over here. The ringtail lemur island is just adjacent to where I have been sitting. There is a stream of water that runs around it that is fairly deep, at least deep enough to keep these animals, they are primates, not quite related to the monkey, but primates nonetheless. I think it was Noel Coward who wrote the song "Mad Dogs and Englishmen Go Out in the Midday Sun." And these ringtail lemurs certainly take that to heart, because during the midday sun they get up in the tree or under a rock or some foliage and they just kind of hibernate. And then in the evening, in the shade or in the early morning, they come out and play. The ringtail lemurs were down having a drink moments ago. Perhaps they'll come down for us again a little bit later. We'll be back and take that train trip after this time out. Tomorrow, opening day, 1,000 animals representing 125 species will roam the canyons and mesas of this compound. Because many of these animals are on the endangered species list, their health care and survival is crucial. In charge of health care services for the 1,800-acre park is Dr. Lester Nelson, and his daily activities include tasks like operating on an elephant's tail, to supervising the birth of a litter of lion cubs. One of Dr. Nelson's prime concerns is the compatibility of different species. Doctor, were you confronted with any special problems in putting these animals out into really non-confined areas pretty much, at least bigger areas than they were used to at the zoo?
We've had some problems, both because of the size of the units and the number of animals that we've mixed together, the number of species. There's been a little more challenging for territory out here than in the zoo, I think probably because there's a chance here to establish some territories, which they don't in Balboa Park. Also, size-wise, of course, it's that much harder to get close to the animal to closely observe it when you think something is wrong. Fortunately, most of them now are not afraid of vehicles because of the type of vehicle we use in all of the compounds being the same, and as long as you're in the vehicles that they know, you can get pretty close to them. Of course, when they get into a ravine or up on a high hill or something, you've just got to wait until they come down to you.
There's a lot of experimenting going on here. Is that what this is, pretty much of an experiment?
I think the whole park is pretty much an experiment. It's something that really I don't think has been tried anywhere before in this magnitude. It's halfway between a zoo and a preserve. We're trying to give the animals as much of a naturalistic area setting as we possibly can, and yet be able to have people observe them. I think it'll take 5 to 10 years really before we have everything that we want in these compounds as far as setting for the animals and for the people.
That was Dr. Lester Nelson. It is his job to make sure that all of these animals here are kept in, well, good health. And it is indeed a job. A short time ago, they released a group of balloons filled with helium, and that kind of marked the first train ride, the first trip of the Wagasa Bush Line. Throughout this program, we have been telling you you're going to take a trip on that Wagasa Bush Line. It's a monorail train that takes visitors on a 5-mile tour of the major areas of the animal park. Now, the tour is designed to show the animals in their natural habitat. The speeches and lunch are now finished, and it looks as though most of those here today are boarding the electric monorail system, and they're now ready for that tour. Some interesting facts about designed and built especially for this park. It runs on electricity and does not emit any pollutants. It travels almost completely silent on a concrete ground level rail. The train follows a 5-mile winding path through the continental areas of East Africa, through South Africa, the Asian plains, North Africa, and the Indian swamp region. And finally, the train passes the gorilla exhibit, and then it returns to Nairobi Village. Upon leaving Simba Station, the first thing you'll see is the elephant enclosure. On the right are the Indian elephants. This expansive enclosure houses 4 of the Asian breed, including Carol Elephant, who now makes her home here at the park. Just across the tracks live the African elephants. And there's a star living here too, Hatari. Though Hatari's grown up just a bit since her movie days with John Wayne. Around the bend from the elephants is Eastern Africa. One of the world's largest antelopes is the fringe-tailed oryx. It lives here too. East Africa is also the haven for the tallest of all mammals, the giraffe. And there are 2 species of zebras found here. Just up the Wagasa Bush Line are the Asian plains. The great Indian rhinoceros, the second largest and most spectacular of the world's 5 species of rhinos, calls this home. And here we find such spectacular exhibits as the Nilgai, the largest of all Asian antelope. Oh, and this fellow with the baseballs on his horns and a face that only a mother could love is the saiga, an animal once nearly extinct. His nasty disposition forced Dr. Nelson to put those baseballs on the ends of the horns. The Asian swamp is a bit more vegetated than the other African areas we have visited. It's also the home of the water buffalo. once again we're headed towards southern Africa. This is the land of rhino herds, of gnus, and inquisitive ostrich. You might have a hard time identifying all these exotic animals, but here's a species you can't miss. Here's a guy you certainly don't want to tangle with, the Cape buffalo, perhaps one of the most respected of all Africa's animals. The last exhibit that we pass on that wild train ride called the Wagasa Bush Line is the gorilla exhibit, right up here behind me. There are some interesting stories about the gorillas on display here at the Wild Animal Park, and when we come back, we'll tell you about them. The gorilla moat here at the Wild Animal Park is unique because of its grassy plain that covers the enclosure's flat area. And the keepers are working hard at keeping the gorillas from pulling the grass up, roots and all. Of the 6 gorillas that will occupy this enclosure, the most famous by far is Alvila. This is Alvila in the Children's Zoo in Balboa Park, just 3 days after her birth. She was born in June of 1965, and at that time she was only the 7th gorilla born in captivity to survive. Her arrival was eagerly anticipated, and her birth was attended by a group of obstetricians from Navy Hospital. The first 12 months of Alvila's life were thoroughly documented. She was the subject of an educational film on primate development. And this is Alvila today, 7 years after her birth. She, along with Little John, who was also raised in the Children's Zoo, and Massa were the first to occupy the new gorilla moat. Massa was a gift to the zoo from Mrs. Rena Eckert Schweitzer, the daughter of the renowned Dr. Albert Schweitzer. Massa is only about half his adult size. He was found abandoned in the jungle by a Peace Corps worker who brought him to the jungle compound of Dr. Schweitzer in Africa. Then, when Massa grew too big to remain at the jungle compound, Mrs. Eckert Schweitzer brought him to the San Diego Zoo. And last month, he arrived at his new home, here at the Wild Animal Park. It was just about this time of day 3 years ago. It was May 14th, 1969. That's when the ground was broken for the Wild Animal Park here in the San Pasqual Valley. All of that happened just right up over my shoulder, up on that hill above the gorilla moat. It was a warm day just like this. The late Chuck Shaw, who was then acting director for the San Diego Zoo for Dr. Schroeder, who was in Europe at the time, he gathered all of us together, a group of civic officials, zoo officials, and, well, I was a reporter on that particular story that day. He gathered us together and he told us about a preserve for endangered species for everyone in the future. His envision was a wilderness of the future. Well, finally they gave the signal and the ground was broken for that particular preserve. It all happened in 1969. And so it was, almost 3 years ago to the day. The only thing then heralding the future of this park was a billboard. The countryside undeveloped and infested with cactus. A group of zoo and city officials, along with the news media, gathered on this hill that now overlooks Nairobi Village. Zoological Society President Anderson Borthwick gave the signal and a bulldozer broke ground for the San Diego Wild Animal Park. That was the beginning. So today the park was dedicated. Tomorrow it opens its gates to the public, who will come here to marvel at the exotic creatures from all over the world. And by coming here, they will participate in an effort to create a haven for threatened wildlife. For many of its animal inhabitants and for the people who come here to see them, this park may be the only wilderness they will ever know. It is then the wilderness of the future.
Bless the beasts and the children, for in this world they have no voice, they have no choice.